Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kate Barron, Head of Programs for the Inland Empire Lunch and Learn series. And today, you're going to be viewing a presentation by Angel de Sevilla. He's a lean manufacturing consultant, and he's going to be talking about Mickey Mouse Band-Aids and other time wasters. So thank you for joining us today. And with that, I'll have Angel introduce himself.
Good afternoon. My name is Angel de Sevilla, and I'm a lean manufacturing consultant based out of Montebello, California, which is about 8 miles east of downtown LA. So I'm fairly local to the Inland Empire. I've been doing lean manufacturing for almost 20 years now. I've started working as a manufacturing engineer at H&I Corporation, and I eventually became the lean enterprise manager for one of the divisions. And in 2006, where they moved the division to Iowa, I started doing consulting and been doing it since. And I've been happy to say that it's working out pretty well so far. And what we're going to talk about today is one of the things that I discovered when we do lean type projects is that there's several different approaches you can take. And although a lot of people like to do the usual time studies and line balancing and 5S, and of course that's all extremely important, one of the things that I discovered is that another approach that you can start with is actually fixing the hundreds of tiny little problems that we have in our production. We talk about, it's what I call, not myself, but what a lot of people that I've talked to call Mickey Mouse, which is basically you go out and you have a problem, you have an issue with a machine, and rather than going out and shutting the machine down and fixing it correctly, we tend to go out and put a Band-Aid on it. We tend to go out and just do a quick fix and keep running it. And over time, what ends up happening is we create a culture that basically says, just keep running it, no matter what it takes, whatever it takes, keep running it. And I found that that's actually not in the long term, that's not a good mindset to have, because you're encouraging people to take shortcuts. So we're going to talk a little bit about identifying problems with machinery, with production. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time today on the actual human side of it. This is more on equipment, machinery, and also the importance of using good quality tools and consumables and replacing them before they break down. It's one of the things that I always like to tell people is we don't wait until our car runs out of gas before we go out and fill it up again. We don't wait until the engine breaks before we change the oil. We tend to go out and change the oil at a certain interval because we don't want our car to break down. Yet quite often we don't do the same thing with our machinery and equipment that often cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And also talking about having systems that work for you instead of working for the system. And we'll get into, we'll explain what that means in a little bit. Next slide, please. So I usually start a lot of my lean engagements, and again, some of it also has to do with what the clients want, but I've discovered that this type of approach, and we start with 3 fairly simple questions. Next, please. And the first one, we talk about, we have a lot of 3-letter acronyms. We have complex processes. Next, please. And we can filter it down to 3 questions. Next, please. And what I like to do is ask them continuously, promptly, act upon them as quickly as possible. And we don't have to spend a lot of money for these things to pay out a lot of investments. Next slide. So one of the things I like to do is have people understand, number 1, that you have a problem. Number 2, understand the actual cost of these problems. And number 3, develop a desire to solve that actual problem. Next, please. So the first question that I tend to ask pretty much anybody and everybody when I start doing a work, and I think is a question that anybody in management should be continuously asking is, what is your job and how does your job add value to the company? Next, please. It's important that everybody understands the concept of value and waste. Next, please. Give me a second. Somebody just said. Oh, my apologies. Also, we got to understand where do people. How does your job help the company deliver quality products or service to your customers at a competitive price? At the end of the day, when everything's said and done, if you work in manufacturing, that's what you try to do. You try to deliver a quality products, quality service on time at a competitive price. And if your job does not contribute to that, then you got to ask yourself, well, what is your value? Next, please. If you did not do your job, how is the company affected? What is not going to happen that will adversely affect the company if you did not do your job? With everybody understanding their role. One of the things that I have found in a lot of companies is people, they have a job and they know that, well, I get paid to do this, but they don't see the big picture and what they do. And I have found that when people actually see and understand the big picture, they tend to take their jobs a little bit more seriously. They tend to take a little bit more pride in their job because they ultimately see that they are part of a team. Next, please. Number two, what are the issues that prevent you from doing your job effectively and efficiently? A lot of us, next please. Usually when we have, when people are trying to do their job, when they're trying to add value, and we need to ask the first question, because when you understand what is it that you add to the company, then we can start talking about, well, what are the things that prevent you from adding the company? And these can be divided into equipment issues, system issues, personnel issues, and management issues. We're not going to talk about personnel and management issues here. We're going to focus on the first two. Next, please. And of course, the last two are important, and they should be part of your overall lean strategy, your overall continuous improvement, trying to figure out, do we have the right people in the right management roles, and do we have the right people in the right roles, and do these people add value? And just to be clear, I don't necessarily mean to imply that when I say that somebody does not add value, that's not a reflection on the individual, that is a reflection on management. You can have very good people, and if they're not doing the job that is to the best of their ability to help the company, that's a management issue. And I've seen a lot of really good people that they end up doing jobs that it's basically you're underutilizing the talent. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about equipment issues. Next. Such as malfunctioning equipment, so machinery, equipment that is not working correctly. Next. Consumables being used beyond life expectancy, drill bits, blades, punches, tools. A consumable is anything that is designed to be replaced, like the oil in your car, any cutting tool, anything that is designed over a certain amount of time to be replaced on a regular basis. Next, please. Materials. I have several clients that like to buy cheap materials because, well, it's cheap. Now, the problem with buying inferior materials is you're saving yourself money on the materials, but what tends to happen is your machinery doesn't work as efficiently. You start having problems with equipment. You start having problems with production and productivity. And one of the things, people don't tend to quantify this. If you have a part that, for example, should run at 30 pieces an hour, and because you're purchasing material that needs to be processed further than what you were planning on it, what ends up happening is your cost goes up, and more often than not, nobody's actually keeping track of this. Well, what is the cost of you not delivering your product, or you not going out and making your product in what is expected in the expected time frame? Next, please. Also, computer equipment, and I do know that we have some other people here that do work with computers software. A lot of this has to do with MRP software. It blows me away. I've worked with very large companies that everybody here has heard of, and they have 4 or 5 different computer systems, and they don't really work really well with each other. So now they have to go out and do an Excel spreadsheet and bring data from one computer system, and then bring data from another computer system, and then go out and crunch the numbers in Excel so they can put it into a third computer system, and that simply just does not add a whole lot of value, in my opinion. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about consumables. Next, please. Like I was telling you before, you don't run out of gas before you fill up your car. You don't wait till your engine seizes before you change the oil. Next, please. Next, please. But quite often, I see companies that they run their equipment until it starts to malfunction. They have no preventive maintenance. They have no plan on replacing items. They start running, and whenever they see bad parts coming out, then they start thinking about replacing the consumables. The problem with this, of course, is, well, you make bad parts. This quite often tends to happen at the worst possible moments. For some reason, Murphy's Law kind of kicks in, and it happens on a Friday afternoon. Order that needs to be delivered right now, and all of a sudden you don't have the actual parts that you need. Next, please. I've seen companies scrap thousands and thousands of dollars because they refuse to replace a $75 component. I've seen machines working at a fraction of the capacity for 8 months because somebody $400 component that took 45 minutes to replace. So instead, they run the machine at 75, 80% of its capacity for months and months and months at a time, because they'll say, well, we don't have time to shut the machine down and replace a component. And yet, when they actually do go down up on my insistence or somebody else's insistence, they realize that about 3 days, they made up that 45-minute that they wasted, so quote unquote, on replacing that component. They made it up sometimes in 3 days. In one specific situation, they actually made that up in less than a day, just because they went on and took the time to change the component and not just live with it, so to speak. Next, please. So if you have a machine that makes you thousands of dollars a day, that's really not the place to skimp on consumables or replacement parts. One of the things that just hurts me so much is I see companies go out and buy a toolkit for their $500,000 machine, but they go to Harbor Freight Tools. And I love Harbor Freight Tools, but I wouldn't go and buy their tools to work on a machine that's worth $500,000. There's a place for everything. That's just not the place for it. Next, please. So we'll talk a little bit about limps versus catastrophic failures. And next, what I define as a limp is any issue, any problem that prevents you from running your machine to full capacity or to full speed. So it could be a consumable issue. It could be that a component is not working correctly. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of different limps. And not a day goes by that I don't walk into a company and I can't spot a limp here or there. People just kind of making do. A catastrophic failure, on the other hand, is anything that completely shut down your machine. Even if it shuts it down for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, for the sake of this discussion, we say, well, your machine is shut down. What a lot of people tend to not realize is limps are way more costly than catastrophic failures. When your machine shuts down, you basically rally the troops, you call whoever needs to be called, you call maintenance, you order the parts, you go out, replace the parts, and you're up and running as quickly as possible. So it gets people to action. Limps, on the other hand, people just tend to put a Band-Aid on it and keep working with it. And instead of working at 100% capacity, at 100% speed, maybe you run at 90% speed or 80% or even slower. But the mindset that many people have is, well, at least it's running, so let's go ahead and just keep it running. And we'll fix it when we have time. And the reality is I never see a company actually having time. Eventually what happens is your machine breaks down and your breakdown is worse than it would have been otherwise because you just let it go. Next, please. Okay, next again. Okay, next. So again, even though, and interestingly, when I poll people, everybody tells me, well, yeah, limps are more expensive, but yet I don't see a lot of people with a drive to go out and replace the limp. Most of the time, it is way too often a lot easier to just say, you know what, put a Band-Aid on it and just keep it running. Next, please. So what we call Mickey Mouse is, next, please. And next. Next. It's the quick, inexpensive Band-Aid repair to keep the machine running until we have more time to fix it. And like we talked about earlier, we never have time to fix it. So we have days, weeks. The worst one I saw in my personal experience was a $400 component that took 45 minutes to replace. And for 8 months, it had shut this machine down. And just to give you some numbers for you to work with, the fact that this component did not work meant that a setup was 45 minutes instead of 10 minutes with the component working correctly. So you got 30 minutes, it took you 30 extra minutes every time you did a setup. This particular machine did 2 to 3 setups a day for 5 days a week for 8 months. And they kind of kept limping along because they told me, well, we don't have time to stop it. We don't have time to fix it. We're just going to live with this. And examples like this, I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens. I had another example from a client who they had a machine that wasn't working properly, and the machine resulted in a $10,000 scrap in an order. They scrapped $10,000 worth of product, and to buy a new machine would have been $7,000. So it actually took them, they've had other issues before where they had scrap material. So it took them until they scrapped more than the value of replacing the piece of equipment before they realized that, well, maybe we should do something about this. Next, please. One of the big causes of limps is inferior consumables, which I think is the ultimate Mickey Mouse. Try to save some money on drill bits, cutting tools, materials. Again, not the time to, if this is the machine and the equipment that makes you money, not the time and the place to try to skimp on that, because you will pay for that later on, and invariably you end up paying more. Next, please. So a question that I like to ask people is, what do you need? What kind of tools do you need? Get people the right tools to make the job easier and safer. I've seen everything from people using blades without handles, people using screwdrivers to open boxes, people using all sorts of things as hammers, people going out and bending a piece of cardboard to use as a dustpan instead of having an actual dustpan. So we got people coming in and they improvise, they do what I call the prison shank type tools. And interestingly, I've heard managers say, well, look at how innovative and look how resourceful my people are that they make their own tools. And my answer to that is, well, no, shame on you, because you're not providing them the tools, so they have to go out and improvise. And the time that they spend making these homemade tools is time that they're not spending making you product. And quite often these are things like screwdrivers, box cutters, wrenches, hammers, hand tools that you can go to Sears and get a handful of, craftsmen, go to Snap-on and get some quality tools. They're easily accessible tools. These are not complex, complicated pieces of equipment that cost thousands of dollars. Next, please. So here's an example of a dustpan shovel made from a gallon bottle. I think it's a bleach bottle. So I believe they were using this to move material from one container to another. It was the material was like, think of it as small little pebbles, and well, they couldn't get them. They couldn't get a tool, so they made their own. Next, please. Or this razor, which they'll took a razor and put a piece of wood dowel over it, and they went out and this was their razor instead of getting an actual handle to go with the razor, which would have made it a lot safer. Next, please. Let's talk a little bit about systems, and when we talk about systems, are the things you have to do to get your job done. Policies, procedures that must be followed, data entry that you need to do. And now the reality is every company needs to have systems to get work done. You can't have a company that has no systems whatsoever. Having said that, quite often they can be outdated. Not as the company grows, as a company evolves, these systems don't change. You try to use a piece of software that's intended for a handful of transactions a day, and now you're doing hundreds and hundreds of transactions, and the software just doesn't keep up. And I'm not just talking about software, even though software, in my experience, is a significant contributor of this part, but it also has to do with paperwork. What kind of forms do you have to fill up? How many forms do you have to fill up? When you fill up the form, where do you take them? What is the reason that we have people filling up these forms? Is it just to collect data? What do you do with the data once you collect it? You go out and you put it in a spreadsheet and then put it on a graph and then post it somewhere, but nobody takes a look at it, nobody cares, nobody even knows it's there, but you're spending resources doing these things. Next, please. So anytime you look for a system workaround as part of our daily routine, give you an example. Sometimes the system doesn't accommodate a certain change that you have to do. So you have to go in and kind of do a workaround with the system, and that kind of becomes tribal knowledge. You have what we like to call a system within a system. So you only have a handful of people that can do that job, because you only have a handful of people that can go into the computer and go into some obscure screen in order to change some data, because we haven't set up the computer to accept the data in the way we want to accept it. We have people spending time and resources trying to get around the system. One of the ones that I personally witnessed, we set up a Kanban system, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's basically a visual inventory system. Well, one of the leads, they didn't want the management team to know that the Kanban wasn't working as well as the management system wanted. So they went out and they hid a bunch of inventory. So when the Kanban system failed, they would go out and get their inventory, their secret stash, and use their secret stash. Of course, what this happened is because management did not know that the Kanban system wasn't working. They didn't know that that something had to be fixed. And by the way, a lot of this is actually promoted by management, because when management says, I need you to use this and it better work, if it doesn't work, then there's a lot of pressure to basically hide any problems from management. So even though we're not going to get into a lot of details of, well, what can management do, one of the things about it is management needs to be constantly open and constantly looking at, are our systems working? Is the equipment, are the machines working? And if not, let's go out and give people the right tools instead of trying to Mickey Mouse things, instead of trying to just put a Band-Aid on it. Next, please. So like I was telling you, somebody was telling us, well, your Kanban system only works because I've been hoarding inventory to pick up the slack. Well, if we had known, then we would have adjusted the Kanban quantity so that they would not have this problem. But for some reason, the leads were afraid of telling management, hey, we're having issues with this. We are having some problems. I see this a lot. For example, I see a lot of hoarding in companies where they'll say, we're only going to order office supplies once a month because we want to save money in our office supply orders. So as soon as the office supply, I was at a client where somebody was running around like crazy looking for Post-it notes because nobody had any Post-it notes. And then I go 20 minutes later, I'm at somebody else's office and they open their drawer and they're completely stocked with Post-it notes. And I told them, hey, so-and-so was looking for some Post-it notes, and he told me, well, these are mine. I'm not sharing them with anybody else because then I'm going to run out. So somebody's out there running around spending time looking for, how much is a Post-it note packet? A couple of dollars? The time that person spent looking around for Post-it notes was well over $2 worth of that person's value. I can guarantee you that. But because the company has this idea that let's only order things when we need them, let's only order things once a month because it saves us money. They don't see all the money that's being wasted with people coming in. As soon as the Post-it notes come in, people go in and they hoard them. They use them all up, and 2 hours after the Office Depot shipment comes in, there's no more Post-it notes because people are hiding them. Next, please. Now, one of the things about having an effective systems is strict adherence to the system. What is the point of having a procedure? What is the point of having a policy? What is the point of having a system if people get to pick and choose when to use it, when not to use it? When you do this, you create an environment. You create an environment where it says, get it done. It's better to get it done than to get it done right. If you have a policy that it cannot be enforced and that cannot be followed consistently, you're better off either adjusting it, tweaking it so it can, or eliminate it altogether. Every time you institute a policy or a procedure, somebody has to go out and follow it. Somebody has to go out and do it. That takes time. That takes resources. That costs money. And like I said, it is important to have systems, but the systems are supposed to help you be productive. You don't work for the system. The system should work for you. I was in a situation where I was trying to change something, and the worker that I was working with told me, I agree 100% that what you're telling me is going to be faster and more and easier, but our computer system doesn't allow us to do that. So we're not going to go out and change things and save money because we're a slave to our MRP system. So if you have any problem, enforcing the system, making sure the system is followed, change it or get rid of it. There has to be systems, and if you have a system, if you have a policy that's not followed or enforced, it's useless. It's adding complexity. Even worse is if you enforce it inconsistently, because that is when people start getting the idea that, well, there's preferential treatment. I have to do X, but the other person doesn't have to do it, and then you have other human factor issues that you have to deal with. Next, please. Also, you have to trust the system, and part of trusting the system is knowing that the system is going to work, and knowing that the moment it starts not working, then we're going to go out and change it or adjust it so that it does work for the company. Next, please. So only have policies and procedures that you are willing to enforce. If you are not willing to enforce policy and procedure, get rid of it. or adjust it so that you are willing to enforce it. Next, please. One of the scariest things that I have actually heard an inspector say, and this was a manufacturer of components that go into space, and we're basically talking about specifications that a component had, and I'm asking them, well, how do you inspect this? And the inspector told me, well, we don't inspect that particular specification. And I was like, well, it's here. Why don't you inspect it? And the quote you have in front of you was exactly almost verbatim what he told me. If I had to inspect every single requirement of every single part we have, we won't get anything done. So I was absolutely terrified when I saw that, because what the guy is telling me is I get to pick and choose what I inspect, or, well, sometimes somebody else tells me what to inspect and what to ignore. And my question is always, if you're going to ignore that, then why is it even there? Why not get rid of it altogether if it's not important? Next, please. So what to do? First and foremost, create a responsive atmosphere where the equipment will be shut down and repaired when a problem is identified. A lot of this at the beginning requires management to be there and identify these issues, identify these problems, and go back and say, you know, fix it correctly, fix it right. Don't go out and put a Band-Aid, don't put a Mickey Mouse, don't grab a paper clip and duct tape and zip ties to come up with a solution. Do it right. Have a atmosphere. Employees need to be comfortable asking for the tools they need. One of the worst things that I see managers do is argue whether somebody needs a $12 screwdriver or not. Just give them the $12 screwdriver. If you show your employees that you trust their judgment and the way they do their work and the way what they need, they're going to go out and be a lot more open and a lot more willing to share with you when there's an issue. Otherwise, they're just going to clam up and they're just going to go out and try to fix a problem themselves. And in the long run, that actually causes more problems. Next, please. And mind your systems. Make sure that the systems are there to help you do your job. Make sure that the things that you need to do, the spreadsheets you need to make, the databases you need to maintain, all that stuff actually either helps you or it helps somebody else manufacture good components or provide good products and services at a competitive price. If not, then you have to think about, do we really need this and should we get rid of it? Next, please. So that is basically what I have at this particular moment. I guess if there's one idea that I want to leave everybody with is the idea of making sure that everybody has the right tools that they need and making sure that to provide the correct tools. And when something's not working right, when something starts hiccuping, address it as quickly as possible. Don't wait until it becomes a huge issue. Take care of it when it's small. So at this point, if anybody has any questions, I'll love to hear them.
Thank you for that, Angel. I'm looking for questions, and currently we do not have any.
Okay.
Do you have time to give folks a few minutes to enter their questions?
I'm sorry?
I said, do you have a minute to give time?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Angel, it looks like we have no questions for you today.
Okay.
All right. Well, this is Kate. Well, with that said, we'll go ahead and end the presentation. And Angel, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our attendees for taking time to view this presentation today. It has been recorded, so if anyone wants recording, we'll go ahead and send it to them. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.